It's good day to brew, baby. What is up? You should be your boy Millsy. Back to Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB. Always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today we're continuing through our Avatar content, and today we're talking about Ozai, the Phoenix King, a 6-mana Rakdos commander with Trample, Firebending 4, and Haste. Remember that Firebending 4 is that whenever he attacks, we're going to add 4 red mana to our mana pool that we can only spend during combat. Now, Ozai adds the ability to have us keep the mana around, except it becomes red instead. Won't really matter as much for the Firebending, but again, we'll still keep it around. And then Ozai actually gains flying and indestructible as long as we have 6 or more unspent red mana, or unspent mana in general. So the way this will work is with Ozai ability, we'll be able to keep mana in between phases and turns, which is something you're not normally allowed to do. And Ozai makes us want to do this so that he has flying and indestructible becomes a really big threat. And that way to keep mana is something that's really going to help us not only posit our game plan by trying to get as much mana as we can into our mana pool, but it's going to allow us to use really big abilities and spells as mana sinks, and even talk about ways to take multiple combats. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit earlier for such $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. Well, Ozai isn't the only creature, of course, that has Firebending. There's a lot of ways we could take advantage of this ability, and I think adding them together allows us just to get more mana in our mana pool. Avatar Roku doesn't have Firebending, but it's a very similar ability. It says whenever a player attacks, we add 6 red mana. Until end of combat, we don't lose this mana as steps end. And then for triple red, we can give a creature a buff. So again, the nice part here is now we can net 6 mana, and that actually happens whenever any player attacks, potentially allowing us to net more mana between turns. Firebending Student just has Firebending X, where X is its power, and it has prowess, so as we cast spells, it'll get bigger and can net us more mana. Fire Sages just has Firebending 1, and we could pay 3 mana to put a counter on it, growing it. It's a nice sink for our mana if Ozai dies. Because the big thing to remember about Ozai's ability is if Ozai were to be removed, all the mana of our mana pool is then going to leave after that phase. So it's important to note that if something does go wrong, and we're left with a bunch of mana in our mana pool, we want to find a way to spend it, and Fire Sages is one of those ways to dump it into its ability. Same thing with Vindictive Warding, 3 mana to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Zuko Exiled Prince lets us exile the top card of our library and play it that turn. Again, both of those do pack Firebending. And then Fire Nation Turret, at the start of combat our turn, we give a creature +2/+0 on Firebending 2, and then we can pay a red mana to put a charge counter on it. And when you have 50 charge counters on it, you could take them all off to deal 50 damage to a target. Nice way to store up that mana if we needed to, and just laser beam an opponent down with fire if we have to. Firebender Ascension comes in, makes a token with Firebending 1, and then whenever a creature we control attacking causes its own ability to trigger, we put a counter on it, and it has 4 more counters. That goes off a second time. So this will double up Firebending for all of our creatures, hopefully once we get all the counters on it. And then Legend of Roku exiles some cards on the front, adds us some mana, and then when it flips over, turns into Avatar Roku, a 4/4 creature with Firebending 4 that for 8 mana can make a dragon with Firebending 4. So I like this. Nice way to put the mana in tier to get more later, and really stack up those Firebending abilities to take advantage of. But again, one of the really nice things about Ozai is that it allows you to keep your mana around. So there's other ways to make mana. You have things like Neheb that says at the start of our post-combat main phase, we add a red to our mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So the more damage we did in combat, the more red we add. Mana Geyser adds us a bunch of red mana for each tap lands our opponents control. So since combat's just going to give all of our creatures Firebending 5 until end of turn, allowing them to net even more mana. Doubling Cool is just going to straight take and double the amount of each type of mana in our mana pool, which is really huge every turn, netting us more and more and more mana. The Reaver Cleaver gives creatures attached to Trample, and whenever it hits a player, you make that many treasures, so those treasures can turn into mana. And then Braid of Fire is a very interesting enchantment. Cumulative Upkeep is a ability that says each turn you basically do that +1 more. So the first turn it would be 1, and then 2, and then 3. Well, Braid of Fire just adds you red mana. So this means every upkeep we're adding more and more red mana Tyranno pool. Fits so well with what Ozai is trying to do. But eventually we have to use the mana, right? Whether unfortunately we have to do it at instant speed or we do it proactively, right, during one of our main phases. We want to give different ways to do that. Things like Inferno the Star Mounts, which can get itself a buff with red mana, and then when it hits 20 power, it deals 20 damage to a target. Crack with Power and Insanguinary are both ways to either deal damage or force our opponents to lose life. Again, the bigger the X is, the better, right? Dealing more damage. Same thing with Jysm, letting Inferno and Comet Storm, these big red X spells that deal damage to your opponents. Now, Tormenting Hellfire is a little bit different. It says that each of your opponents has to do the following process X times. They lose 3 life unless they sack a non-land permanent or pitch a card. So the bigger X is, the more times they're forced to do this, and probably the more times out of 10 you're going to really hit them for dealing some. They're going to have to choose the damage and really take a hit. Electro Dominance deals damage to any target equal to X, and then you can cast a spell with X or less from your hand for free. And then Demon Spine Whip and Gitu Fire Breathing basically give you a way to buff the creature it's attached to sink some of that mana in there if it means, potentially getting some more damage. But where I think most people are going to go with Ozai is ways to take multiple combats and really start to continue just to press Ozai, either being a flying, indestructible, trampling creature or using that mana to our benefit. And one of the 2 cards we can do that on is Hellkite Charger. It's a big 6 mana dragon. It says whenever it attacks, you can pay 7 mana, and if you do, you untap all attacking creatures, and there's an additional combat. So as long as we can produce enough mana, combat over combat, we can pay 7 mana to just continue to take combats. Now, there's a second way we can do this that we'll talk about on the next slide, but there are basically 2 cards that can do this. Again, if we can produce enough mana consistently. Carlock just says whenever we attack, if it's the first combat of the turn, we untap all our creatures and they get first strike, and there's an additional combat. Overpowering Attack can give us another combat and untap all the creatures that attack this turn. We can actually pay it for 3 as long as Ozai hits an opponent. Great Terrain Heist can hand out first strike and get us additional combat, depending on how much we're willing to pay. And then Savage Beating can give us another combat, but can also give all of our creatures double strike, which is really interesting. But the other key card here you're going to see in a lot of these Firebending and these mana type shells is Aggravated Assault. During your main phase, you can pay 5 mana, you untap all your creatures, and you get another combat. So again, this is an easier threshold than Hellkite Charger because you only need 5 mana, right? And then you can get an extra combat. Now remember, Aggravated Assault has to be activated at sorcery speed, so you can't actually activate it during combat. But again, Ozai helps it gets around that because he just takes all the Firebending mana that we made in combat and just says, hey, I'm going to keep it around for you, and then during our main phase, we can use it for the assault. So that's one of the key ways to take this deck up to the next level. Now, ideally, you want to net enough mana so that Ozai stays flying indestructible, and you can use Aggravated Assault, but I think you're going to notice in different game plan situations, it may be worth it to start pinging, especially if Ozai still doesn't have any blocks that can threaten him, or if you can still get him through for big damage. I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever perfect, and going into testing, I think there's a couple ways we can take advantage of this. I have things like Fated Firepower in the deck, but I kind of like the idea of adding more things that augment the amount of damage you're doing with things like City on Fire or Fire Emancipation and things like that. These enchantments that just double and triple the amount of damage you would do. This is just going to only help end the game sooner. And we should have enough mana to start getting these enchantments down pretty quickly. So I think that makes a ton of sense to me. You have more ways to give out Firebending. Fire Nation attacks make some Firebenders. You have other things that can give out Firebending if that's the route you want to go. And then Storm King's Thunder is just here as an option for ways to find more X spells to dump mana into. Now, the fun thing about Storm King's Thunder is it's actually an X spell that says, well, whenever you cast your next instant sorcery, you copy it that many times. So, depending on how much mana you have, you could use this and copy a key spell, a bunch of times. It's not as readily available as I think the damage game plan is. That's why I think I kind of like the idea of adding on something like City on Fire a little bit more. But it's just important to see that you have options in how you want to take the deck and how you want to profit from all this extra mana you have laying around. Well, let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to get in and show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what hands we look to keep and how we're going to set them up. So here I've got a 4-lander with a Rakdos thing. So I'm very close to Ozai in 6 mana. We have Zuko Firebending Master. which has Firebending X, where X is the number of experience counters you have, and we get experience counters by playing spells during combat. And we have Phyrexian Arena, another way to draw cards each turn. So I kind of like the idea right now of working my way up towards getting the Arena in. So here we're at 4 mana. We could go Zuko plus the Student, or we could go the Arena, right, to draw extra cards. I don't mind doing the Zuko plus the Student. Gaining access to more things. Now here at 5 mana, we're just 1 off Ozai, which we have next turn, so I think I'll play the Arena. So the Arena, you get to draw an extra card. The cost is just 1 life. There we see the Aggravated Assault, which is pretty interesting. Now we can play Ozai. And I just realized I could have Firebended last turn with a Student. But either way, you can attack this turn, Firebending 4. We can attack with Zuko. Unfortunately, you're just not going to Firebend anything. We haven't played any spells during combat. And we don't actually have any spells we can play. And then the Student will just be a 1/2. So I don't really see the point of playing with either of them. But now, basically, I'm going to do this just to show how much red mana we have. Now, because of his Firebending 4, we're going to have 4 floating red mana. Now, we can do this. We can pay the Assault. We could get Lightning Greaves in and attach it, which doesn't seem like a bad idea to me. It may look odd, but I think protecting Ozai is a really big deal. Especially because we can get more mana right next turn. And then as we come into our next turn, again, we draw off of the Phyrexian Arena, 6/7 mana. Love the idea of getting the Assault down. I'm just not at the point of having enough mana yet where I can go infinite on my combats, right? Because this can get me 1 mana. And if I play the Assault, this will get me 2 every time. But I've got to keep the Student alive, right? She doesn't just automatically do that. But Avatar Roku can, because remember, it adds 6 red mana every time a player attacks. That does not say once a turn. So as long as Ozai's attacking, this is going to net me 6 red mana, and Ozai's going to net me 4 red mana, meaning I'm up 10 mana every time. So I play the Ozai, use the 2 here to play the Ag Assault. This prowess is up, and now when Ozai attacks, I'm going to net 6 red mana here and 10 red mana here. Or 4 red mana there for 10. Ozai's now in the air, right? So now Ozai's out of reach of being probably unblockable. If it's not, he has trample. We go to our main phase, pay 5 mana of this into the Ag Assault to get another combat, and then we go up 10 mana again. So now we're up at 15 red mana, and again, we could pay 5 more. Now, if you wanted to take this a step further, right, you could, once we have enough mana, put down something like Inferno of the Star Mounts, which is going to help us deal more damage each combat, basically just allowing us to speed the process up. Because again, right now we're only dealing 7 with Ozai. Yes, you can use the red mana into Avatar to make it bigger, so make it 10, 13, 16. Then you hit commander damage a little bit quicker. But if you wanted to, you could even use something like Star Mounts to make the process quicker. But again, first combat, we're retaining 5. Second combat, we're retaining 10. Third combat, we're retaining 15. And that's probably the time where I'd start buffing it up with the Roku. But again, then you can just start to see that here we have it. We managed just to find it and a way to net enough red mana to make it possible. But we're not always going to find Ag Assault. So again, we need to see, right, hands where we don't, to really get the full spectrum of what our deck's going to do. Playtest 2 or the 4-laner, there's that Fire Nation turret. We see Fire Sages, and then Fire Lord Ozai. Fire Lord Ozai says whenever it attacks, we can sack another creature. If we do, we add red equal to its power, and we don't lose mana as the phases end, steps end this combat. And then for 6, we can exile the top card of each opponent's library and play one of those cards without paying its mana cost until end of turn. So that's a very interesting ability and a way to use some of our mana. Not much to do on turn 1. I think turn 2, the Fire Sages makes the most sense. So we're drawing some interesting things here. We see Seething Song, turn 3 into 5 mana. So technically we'd have 5 red mana this turn if we want to. I'd kind of rather wait and see if we can use it to benefit. Ketis says whenever our commander hits a player in combat, we deal that much damage to their opponent. Pretty nice way to start profiting there. And then Soza's coming, right? Giving everything Firebending 5, so it could net a bunch of red mana. Here, I think I just like the turrets. We can attack if we want to with the Sages, but I don't know how safe of an attack we'll have. And again, I think I'm just 1 turn off of playing Ozai, because remember I pay 3, I only have 1 black source left. So, this Seething Song I would need 1 more black source. Whereas I think next turn, right, we'd be safe. So what do we do for 4 mana? I mean, I love the idea of Ozai. I like the idea of getting Kedis down, right? So that when we get Ozai out, because he does have haste, Kedis can, help us out with that benefit. So I love the idea of that. You could also dump just 2 red mana into the Fire Nation turret if you want to. Remember, we can do that instant speed, so I'd probably leave it up, make our opponents think maybe we have something, and then, right, get the red mana on there before our turn. No reason to waste it. And then here, I'd go this Seething Song, so I have 5 red, 6, 7, and then there we go. I'd play Ozai. And that's really nice now because he's going to net me more mana. I have 1 red left over. I'd probably just throw it into the Fire Nation turret because technically I don't lose it. So I guess technically I don't have to. I could keep it around. But again, now we go to combat. Ozai is definitely going to attack. And I think I'm willing to attack with the Sages here. I had 1 left over. I'm getting 4 from Ozai, so that's 5. And I'm getting 1 from the Sages, which is 6. So if Fire Sages does get in trouble, we could just put 2 counters on it and make it into a 4/4. But I think the point here is that Ozai is attacking and it should trample over. So we either put the 6 mana into the turret if we want to, or we just leave it there and see, what we have access to do that. I would say that if the Fire Sages is going to get killed, just throw the counters on it. Otherwise, I'd probably just retain the mana around just in case. Note that the Sages is an instant speed ability, so we can always do it if somebody removes Ozai, right? We can just dump the mana into it. We can also just dump the mana into the turret. I realize I missed the turret's trigger, so technically instead of 6, we would have, 8 because of the Firebending 2, and I'd probably put the plus on Ozai, just make it a 9/7. So again, now you're guaranteed some damage. We're going to hold the mana around. Now this turn, obviously Neheb, since this is going to be dealing a bunch of damage, let's get Neheb in. Now I've got 8 floating in 1. I could go Sozin's Combat if I want to. Give you all 3 of these Firebending 5. The big thing to note about Firebending is it is an ability you can have multiple of. So Ozai can have Firebending 4 and Firebending 5. Now the only downside to this, if there even is one, is that we just really have no way to take multiple combats. But if you think about it, you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, 17, 22 red mana if I play this, Sozin's Comment, or 22 minus 5 because I got to pay the cost of the Sozin's Comment. I could also get the Ozai down this turn. It does give me that mana sink to get something of my opponent's. And then Neheb, right, could potentially add us more red mana after combat. So I think I like putting a couple of the mana into Sozin's Comet just to get us the Firebending. And then, go to combat. I'll choose, again, Ozai again for the ability since it's Kedis is going to allow it to deal big damage. And then the question is whether you want to put Kedis in harm's way. If I don't have an attack, I probably won't attack with it. I think I'm still going to attack with these. So it's your 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, 17 mana just being netted. And then, Ozai being a 9/7 that's now flying indestructible because we have all that mana sitting there. Then main 2, right, we're going to net a bunch more red with Neheb. We could just hard cast this Ozai and just use the bottom ability if we want to. Otherwise, we just keep loading the mana into the turret to save it up. There's so many ways to take advantage of it now, whether you choose to buff the Sages or you get Ozai down and start using it. The nice part is that if somebody removes Ozai, we have 1 and 2 ways to spend the mana, and it has to be a way to exile him because he is indestructible. So now you can start to see where Ozai gets so nice as a commander to protect once you start getting this mana floating and why Firebending is so good. I don't mind the idea of just throwing down Ozai as a way to take advantage of its bottom ability. Again, the only problem with the bottom ability is because of the way the ability is worded, I still have to play that spell at a legal time I could play the spell. It doesn't just play it for free right now. And so if I choose to use Ozai's bottom ability on my opponent's turn, I'd only be able to cast instants right during their turn. So I think the bottom ability on Ozai is only good if we can really take advantage on the mana on our turn, which we can. Like I said, I think we have like north of 20 mana floating, so we could be able to access this multiple times. And note that each of these triggers is separate. So for each 6 mana trigger, I get to play one of those cards, for free. So we'd be able to play at least 3 cards this turn for free if I wanted to do that, to try to stretch for some more value. So you can kind of see that, like, now we're starting to set up this fun, and Neheb's going to help us out a ton once this Ozai gets in the air. And you have to remember that I actually didn't calculate in the head properly. Remember that Kedis takes what Ozai dealt to the first opponent and inflicts it to the other two, meaning more life's actually been lost. So we're probably adding about, let's say Ozai's a 9/7, they had a 1/1 to block, or a 2/2 to block. That's still 7 damage going through. You're doing 7 to the other two. Now you're talking about 21 red mana from the Hev, right? Plus the other mana, plus the life they lost from fire sages, whatever, if it attacks. So you can start to see where Neheb's just going to net us a ton of red mana. Again, useful for this and useful for the turret. So again, just another example where we saw great pieces to use Ozai's mana to our advantage. And I think that's what we want this deck to do. You really want to find key ways to do that. Here we've got a 4-laner with a Talisman. We got some removal and Ashling. Ashling allows us to keep red mana around, so she's another way to protect Ozai's bottom ability if we find into it. It also gives us payoffs whenever we cast spells. Otherwise, I think we're just going to be getting some lands down and getting our way started. We also see Leyline Tyrant, a dragon that does, again, something very similar. We don't lose unspent red mana, right, as steps and phases end. So we have a way to protect some of our mana. 5 mana here. We unfortunately are just 1 off of Ozai. Could do Student plus the Greaves. The Greaves could be a fun way to protect Ozai. It looks like that kind of worked out. Get Ozai in for 4. We retain the 4 around. I'd almost rather wait until next turn because then I can load up the Charger. So come to this turn, 6 mana for the Charger. And I've got 1 left here, but I've got 4 left from Ozai. Attack with it and the Charger. I get 4 from the Ozai. I can now pay the 7 into the Charger. Now the only problem is I only have 1 left. And next combat I'd only get to 5. So this isn't enough yet to go deep unless I want to put the Firebending Student out there. That still only gets me to 6. So I'm still 1 off. But, I mean, it goes to show you that this could be really beneficial. Now, if I'd left a black mana up, I guess I could technically have terminated before the start of the first combat. That would have lost me a red mana to start, but it would have made Firebending Student a 2/3, Firebending for 2. And that might have made the difference in the second combat. Because we would have had enough mana the first time. I actually think that might have done it. It just relies on that 2/3 Firebending Student staying alive. But even if we just take the 1 combat, Ozai is dealing out a ton of damage. You also have the Hellkite Tyrant dealing out a ton of damage. And then we come back to our turn now, holding 7, 8 mana up, plus 4 is 12. So if we had at least 2 mana left over, we can now start the loop and get at least a couple combats this turn and continue to attack into our opponents. I don't know if we go infinite there, but we still get a couple pretty good combats there to deal out some big damage. Last one, playtest for here. We got a 5-lander with Neheb and Karlach. Again, both ways to really add us some good mana. We see Fire Nation Palace, a new land for 2 mana and tapping it. You can give another creature Firebending 2, or Firebending 4, sorry, a good way to add some more mana. So for 2 mana, we could basically give Ozai Firebending 8, which is not nothing. That's definitely something to think about. Play the boots, play the whip, right? Get them down, get them started. I think I like Karlach here, because then I can go Ozai, and now they can both attack, so they're both going to untap and get first strike. 4. So basically 8 mana total. I don't mind getting something like Neheb down. Unfortunately, we kind of missed its window, but I'll put the... Well, maybe you just attach the boots and the whip instead. Leave... Well, it's what, 6 mana to give it an indestructibility? Yes, maybe I'll just attach the boots to leave the indestructibility there, right? That way we don't have to worry about it. And then now, we know we're going to have the 2 combats. Bulk Up is very interesting, doubling its power till end of turn, making it 14. It's already in the air. If I attach the whip, I've got the 6 mana staying there, so it's going to stay flying indestructible. I attack, I've got 3, 4, 5, 6 mana. 2 of it would need to bulk up. I pay the other 4 into the whip. It would turn it into an 11 and then double it to 22 with flying and trample. That's a kill on somebody and potentially a kill on another person, depending on if they have the blockers, and you get the first strike because of that. Or you could put the firebending on Ozai. I've still got 4 left over. Now it's got firebending 8, and you could use 4 of it into the whip to make it bigger, or put all 8 of it into the whip, still keeping that mana around. Now you're just using it to buff it until end of turn, making Ozai a 15 with first strike, and you're getting 2 combats. And I think you could start to see where like things like that whip and then the Gitu fire breathing can just do so much to potentially turn all that fire breathing mana into just immediate damage, which is something that I think people aren't going to expect, and something that can really turn the tide of a combat. If you think about it, whether I use bulk up or the mana into the whip, I mean, I think knock 2 players out this turn. I think I can see 2 different lines on how to do it. Doubling up the power to over 21 or 20, 22, 24, to knock one person out, then attacking another person. And then that third person just either has to have a plan to remove your board. Otherwise, it's just open season. So I think you could start to see where, like, with the right set of tools, Ozai can become really dangerous. And I think this just goes to show you why firebending is such a really interesting mechanic. I still think it's my pick for the best mechanic of the 4. I think it's absolute insanity, and I think there's just so many payoffs for it. And I'm not even scratching the surface. I'm not even putting probably as big of a budget into this deck as I could. I've even tried to put in ways with Ashling and Electro and Leyline to try to save Ozai's bottom ability from losing the mana. I mean, if you didn't care, I'm sure you could find a way more glass cannon, way to make Ozai even better and hit even harder. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Ozai down in the comment section below, and I will catch you on the next one.